The Byzantine Empire has often been described as a world of glittering mosaics, sacred icons, and endless court intrigues. It stood for more than 1,000 years, bridging the gap between the ancient and medieval worlds, holding together a realm that stretched across Europe and Asia, and preserving the legacy of Rome while reshaping it into something distinct. Yet when most people think of Byzantium, they picture emperors in golden crowns, generals leading armies, and patriarchs guiding the church. The women of the empire, especially the empresses, are too often pushed into the background, remembered as wives, mothers, or symbols of luxury. What is forgotten is that many of these women were not just figures in the margins of history, but central actors who influenced politics, religion, and culture in ways that changed the destiny of the empire. Behind the purple curtain of the imperial palace, these empresses shaped events that determined whether the empire survived crises or fell into chaos. Some began from the humblest of origins, like Theodora, who rose from a life on the fringes of society to sit beside Justinian and co-rule during one of Byzantium's most glorious periods. Others, like Irene of Athens, shocked the empire by seizing power outright, daring to rule not as consort or regent, but as emperor in her own right. Zoe and Theodora Porphyrogenita, born into the palace itself, turned sisterly rivalry into a unique experiment in shared sovereignty, defying expectations in an empire that was never meant to accommodate two women on the throne at once. Their decisions were not symbolic. They influenced the outcome of riots, reshaped laws, defended the role of icons in Christian worship, and preserved dynastic continuity in moments of danger. What makes their stories so compelling is not only the drama of palace plots, betrayals, and unlikely triumphs, but also the way they challenge the myths about women in power. The Byzantine empresses were not ornamental queens sealed away in luxury. They were politicians, reformers, and visionaries whose actions still resonate today. Their lives remind us that leadership takes many forms, that strength is not limited to the battlefield, and that courage often means standing firm when the world expects you to bow. In this video, we will step beyond the myths and explore the real legacies of these remarkable women. We will follow Theodora's rise from the circus to the purple throne, uncover how Irene of Athens redefined imperial authority, and watch the drama of Zoe and Theodora Porphyrogenita unfold as they turned sisterhood into sovereignty. Along the way, we will reassess how these women reshaped Byzantine politics, faith, and culture, leaving an enduring influence that survived long after their reigns ended. Their unseen threads still run through the fabric of history, and by pulling them into the light, we gain a richer and more complete understanding of the empire that lasted 1,000 years. Welcome to our channel Words of Time, and in this video, we will take you on a journey into the hidden world of Byzantine empresses, where power, faith, and ambition collided behind the purple curtain. Behind the glittering walls of Constantinople, beyond the purple curtain that shielded the private lives of emperors, stood figures who wielded influence in ways the world has often ignored. The Byzantine Empire, which survived for over 1,000 years, was shaped not only by generals, priests, and emperors, but also by women whose hands guided politics, culture, and faith. These women have often been remembered only as consorts or ornaments, but the reality was far richer. They were advisors, power brokers, and sometimes rulers in their own right, moving with subtlety and force in an empire that offered them unique opportunities for influence despite a society that formally restricted their authority. The story of the Byzantine empress is one of both visibility and concealment. The term purple curtain itself refers to the private barrier that separated the emperor and his household from the public gaze. The color purple was tied to imperial power, reserved for those born into the reigning family. Yet while these women lived behind palace walls, they were never truly hidden. Their marriages sealed alliances, their patronage shaped art and religion, and their interventions shifted the course of wars and dynasties. To understand the Byzantine Empire fully, one must move beyond the assumption that its women were passive. They were instead central actors, especially in moments of crisis when traditional hierarchies faltered. The Byzantine Empire, emerging from the eastern half of the Roman world, carried with it the traditions of ancient Rome, but adapted them in ways that made space for female power. Unlike the West, which fragmented under waves of invasion, Byzantium stood as a single state for centuries, balancing its identity between Roman law, Christian theology, and Greek culture. This unique blend created circumstances in which empresses could wield authority, sometimes openly, sometimes through counsel or manipulation. The church often sought to confine women to silence, yet it also provided them with roles as protectors of orthodoxy or patrons of holy causes. The court, with its elaborate rituals and emphasis on legitimacy, depended on women to carry dynastic bloodlines and maintain continuity. This tension between restriction and necessity gave empresses a space to act. One of the clearest examples is Theodora, wife of Justinian in the 6th century. Her rise from humble beginnings to the throne shocked many contemporaries, but her impact on imperial politics was undeniable. Procopius, a historian of the time, tried to undermine her reputation, portraying her as manipulative and scandalous, but even his hostile accounts cannot hide her importance. During the Nika riots, when the capital nearly collapsed into chaos, Justinian was prepared to flee. Theodora refused. She is remembered for telling him that imperial power was worth more than life itself, and that she would rather die wearing the purple than live without honor. Her resolve kept Justinian in the city, and the regime crushed the rebellion. Beyond such dramatic moments, Theodora also championed laws protecting women, particularly actresses and those vulnerable to exploitation. She stands as a figure who forced the empire to reckon with the power of a woman whose authority did not rest solely on her husband's shadow. Yet Theodora was not an exception. Across centuries, empresses influenced imperial succession, military campaigns, and theological disputes. Irene of Athens in the 8th century took power first as regent for her son and later as sole ruler. She convened the Second Council of Nicaea, restoring the veneration of icons at a time when the empire was divided by fierce debates over images. Irene's actions had long-lasting consequences for the Orthodox Church, shaping its traditions to this day. Her decision to blind her own son to secure her position shocked contemporaries, but it also revealed the brutal nature of Byzantine politics, where men and women alike resorted to ruthless measures to preserve authority. By ruling in her own name, Irene shattered the expectation that women could never hold the supreme title, even though later chroniclers condemned her for overstepping what they saw as natural boundaries. These empresses operated in a world where image and ritual were as vital as armies. Byzantine politics was theater as much as it was strategy, and women were skilled at playing their roles. Ceremonial appearances, patronage of churches, and public acts of charity all strengthened their legitimacy. The empress was often portrayed as the mother of the empire, embodying both fertility and stability. This maternal symbolism gave her a moral authority that men sometimes lacked. When soldiers or common people doubted a ruler, the presence of a respected empress could calm unrest or rally support. Her ability to bridge the private world of the palace and the public life of the empire made her indispensable. One cannot overlook the economic power these women controlled. Dowries, estates, and donations allowed them to shape society outside the palace. Many founded convents, endowed hospitals, and supported artisans. Their patronage preserved artistic traditions and advanced theological positions. The mosaics of Ravenna, the grandeur of Hagia Sophia, and countless monasteries across the empire bear the imprint of women's involvement. In these acts, they asserted their presence not only in the politics of their time, but in the physical legacy of Byzantium that endures to this day. The Byzantine system made this influence possible because it constantly needed to reinforce legitimacy. Unlike kingdoms that passed power strictly from father to son, the Byzantine throne was often contested. Coups, assassinations, and usurpations were common. In such instability, empresses provided continuity. Their bloodlines conferred legitimacy on new rulers, and their regencies protected child emperors. Without them, the empire might have fractured far earlier. Every succession crisis demonstrated the quiet but firm hand of women behind the purple curtain, working to preserve dynasties or sometimes to replace them. The myths about Byzantine empresses being only decorative survive because later writers, often monks, judged them through moralistic or misogynistic lenses. Chroniclers preferred to downplay women's achievements or cast them in terms of seduction and intrigue. When a woman ruled effectively, she was accused of being unnatural. When she failed, her gender was blamed. Yet modern scholarship reveals a different picture, one in which empresses were essential actors in the drama of empire. By peeling back the layers of hostility in the sources, we can glimpse their real strategies and decisions. The challenges they faced were immense. Byzantium was constantly under threat from Persians, Arabs, Turks, Slavs, and later Crusaders. It had to manage a vast bureaucracy, a complex church, and a restless population of Constantinople that could erupt in revolt at any moment. In such an environment, even a small misstep could bring ruin. Women had to navigate these dangers with limited official authority, relying on networks of loyal courtiers, eunuchs, and allies within the church. Their ability to survive and even thrive in this environment speaks to their political skill. They knew when to act openly and when to influence from behind the curtain. They mastered the art of alliance, persuasion, and timing. It is striking how often these empresses appear in moments of reform. Theodora with her social laws, Irene with her restoration of icons, Zoe and Theodora, the sisters of the 11th century, who ruled together after decades of turbulence. Each left a mark on the empire's institutions. Even when their reigns ended in turmoil, the changes they championed often endured. This pattern suggests that their influence was not accidental but systemic. The Byzantine world, for all its patriarchal trappings, repeatedly turned to women when stability was at risk. To understand why this was possible, one must consider the symbolic language of the empire. Byzantium presented itself as a reflection of divine order on earth. The emperor was seen as God's chosen representative, the protector of the church. His wife, therefore, held a role that combined queen, priestess, and mother. Though she lacked a formal office in government, her position was woven into the fabric of imperial ideology. She appeared at coronations, processions, and ceremonies that reinforced the sacred aura of the throne. To remove her would have weakened the image of unity and harmony. This symbolic necessity created opportunities for real power. The Byzantine Empire's endurance for more than a millennium cannot be explained by armies and fortifications alone. Its survival depended on an ability to adapt, to find continuity in times of crisis. Women provided much of that continuity. They preserved dynasties, mediated conflicts, and embodied stability when men failed. Their power was sometimes visible, sometimes hidden, but always present. They were not mere shadows in the chronicles of emperors. They were, in truth, architects of empire. By moving beyond the purple curtain, one uncovers a narrative of agency and resilience. These women lived in a world that tried to confine them, but also relied on them. Their voices may be faint in the surviving texts, but their actions echo through the history of Byzantium. To tell the story of the empire without them would be to tell only half the tale. They remind us that power often resides where traditional history has failed to look, and that behind the 1,000-year survival of Byzantium stood not just emperors and generals, but also empresses whose strength shaped the destiny of an empire that bridged the ancient and medieval worlds. The figure who perhaps best embodies the paradox of Byzantine womanhood is Theodora, whose journey from a world of hardship to the highest throne of the empire stands as one of the most striking transformations in recorded history. Born into a family of entertainers, she grew up in an environment that many contemporaries would have considered scandalous and unsuitable for nobility. Her father worked with bears in the circus, and her early life revolved around performance and spectacle rather than scholarship or politics. In that world, she learned resilience, cunning, and the power of appearance, lessons that later proved vital when she entered the palace. For a young woman in the Byzantine Empire, especially one from such a background, the path to power seemed impossible. Yet Theodora's story shows how determination, intelligence, and adaptability could overturn social expectations. Her rise began through personal relationships, but her success was far more than the result of chance. She met Justinian, the man who would become emperor, and their partnership proved decisive for the empire. Justinian was ambitious, determined to restore Roman greatness, and consumed by the task of governance. Yet he also relied on Theodora, not merely as a wife, but as a partner in rulership. Together they became one of the most formidable pairs in history. Far from being a passive companion, Theodora engaged directly in the affairs of state. She advised on legal reforms, influenced foreign policy, and even directed military responses. She shared in the burdens of power and in the dangers of political life, proving herself indispensable to the survival of the regime. One of the most vivid examples of her courage came during the Nika riots in Constantinople. The city, enraged by heavy taxation and political discontent, erupted into rebellion. The Hippodrome, where factions of charioteer supporters gathered, became the center of the uprising. The mob crowned a rival emperor, and Justinian considered fleeing to save his life. At this moment, Theodora gave her famous speech, reminding him that imperial dignity was worth more than survival. She is said to have declared that she would rather perish wearing the purple than live without it. Her resolve stiffened Justinian's will, and instead of abandoning the capital, he ordered a brutal suppression. Thousands were killed, but the empire was preserved. Without Theodora's intervention, the dynasty might have collapsed. Her words reveal not only her bravery, but also her clear understanding of the nature of power. To rule was to risk everything, and hesitation could mean destruction. Her role extended beyond dramatic moments of crisis. Theodora was deeply involved in shaping legal reforms, many of which aimed to improve the status of women and the vulnerable. She pressed for laws against forced prostitution and gave protections to actresses, who were often marginalized in Byzantine society. She worked to ensure that women had rights in marriage and divorce, allowing them greater agency in personal decisions. These reforms reflected her own experience and her desire to use imperial power to alter social realities. In a world where legal codes shaped daily life, her influence left lasting marks on Byzantine law and culture. Her actions challenged the notion that women could not be political actors, proving that compassion and pragmatism could coexist with ruthless statecraft. Theodora's engagement with foreign policy also demonstrates her strategic mind. She favored alliances with certain groups, sometimes in opposition to Justinian's views, and supported factions that could stabilize the empire's position. She was not merely echoing her husband, but actively shaping debates at the highest level. Her presence in councils and her ability to command respect among advisors made her a formidable force. She often championed religious groups who found themselves persecuted, using her authority to protect communities and promote tolerance. This balancing act between firmness and mercy expanded her reputation beyond the palace, making her a figure of reverence for some and suspicion for others. Theodora's power was not free of controversy. Byzantine historians, many of whom disapproved of women in politics, portrayed her as manipulative, immoral, or tyrannical. Procopius, in his Secret History, accused her of cruelty and vice, attempting to tarnish her legacy. Yet even in his hostile account, he could not erase her importance. The very fact that he devoted so much energy to discrediting her shows how central she was to the empire's governance. Modern readers must sift through these accounts carefully, recognizing the bias of male chroniclers who feared female authority. When one strips away the venom of such sources, a different picture emerges, a woman who understood the nature of power and who wielded it with remarkable skill. The partnership between Theodora and Justinian demonstrates the Byzantine model of co-rule, where an empress was more than a ceremonial presence. Together they built monuments that still stand today, most notably the Hagia Sophia, whose dome rose as a symbol of imperial might and divine blessing. Together they pursued ambitious reforms that codified Roman law into a lasting system. Together they faced rebellions, plagues, and wars, always returning to the task of preserving and strengthening the empire. Theodora was not merely standing behind the emperor. She stood beside him, making decisions that shaped the fate of millions. Her legacy endures not only in buildings and laws, but in the very memory of Byzantine resilience. She embodies the possibility of transformation, the idea that someone born into obscurity could ascend to the highest power through intelligence and will. She stands as proof that the purple curtain, though intended to separate, could also conceal a woman whose voice carried as much weight as that of any emperor. Her presence forces us to reconsider the assumptions of history, to recognize that the Byzantine throne was never truly a solitary seat, but often a shared space where empresses held as much responsibility as emperors. Theodora's life also illustrates the contradictions of her age. She was both a reformer and a ruthless political actor, both compassionate toward the vulnerable and uncompromising toward enemies. This complexity reflects the Byzantine world itself, a society of great sophistication and deep cruelty, of dazzling beauty and harsh realities. In this world, Theodora carved out a role that was extraordinary not simply because of her sex, but because of her vision. She saw the empire not as a static inheritance, but as a realm to be molded, defended, and reimagined. Her ability to act decisively, whether in law, religion, or politics, ensured that her voice would echo long after her death. The power of her story lies also in its ability to inspire. Centuries later, readers still marvel at how a woman from the circus could command armies, reshape laws, and stand firm in the face of rebellion. She represents the possibility of transcending limitations, of seizing opportunity even when the odds appear insurmountable. Her example has fueled countless studies, debates, and works of art, each trying to capture the essence of her character. To some she is a saintly protector of the weak, to others a cunning schemer who bent men to her will. The truth, as with most powerful figures, lies in the blend. She was all these things at once, and it is this complexity that makes her unforgettable. When we look at Theodora's life within the larger arc of Byzantine history, we see a pattern. Time and again, empresses stepped forward when the empire needed them most. They were often underestimated, dismissed, or vilified, but their actions proved decisive. Theodora's reign marks a high point in this tradition. She set a standard for female influence that later empresses would emulate, whether through regency, partnership, or sole rule. Her example showed that the purple curtain could conceal more than domestic life. It could hide the mind of a stateswoman whose reach extended across the empire. The endurance of Byzantium across more than a millennium owes much to such figures. Without women like Theodora, Irene, Zoe, and Theodora's namesake who ruled in the 11th century, the empire might have crumbled under the weight of its enemies. These women maintained dynasties, legitimized rulers, and preserved continuity. They acted as guardians of faith and patrons of culture. They remind us that the Byzantine throne was never only about the man who wore the crown, but also about the woman who shared his seat, or, at times, claimed it for herself. Theodora's story, in particular, highlights how personal background could shape political vision. Having known hardship, she pushed for reforms to protect those who had little voice. Having seen the fragility of power, she recognized the need for decisiveness in moments of crisis. Having lived in a world that scorned women in authority, she carved out space for herself by sheer determination. Her rise from circus performer to empress was not only a personal triumph, but also a reshaping of what was possible in her society. Her death did not end her influence. Justinian continued to rule for many years, but he never forgot the role his wife had played in building his empire. The laws they crafted remained, the monuments they commissioned endured, and the memory of her courage lived on. Later generations of Byzantines looked back on her with a mixture of awe and unease, recognizing both her greatness and her defiance of traditional expectations. Yet the very fact that she was remembered when so many other figures faded into obscurity shows the depth of her impact. When we trace the arc of Byzantine history, we cannot separate it from the lives of its empresses. They were not accidental participants but deliberate actors, shaping events with foresight and resolve. Theodora stands at the center of this truth, a symbol of how power behind the purple curtain could be as decisive as any army or decree. To tell her story is to reveal the hidden architecture of the empire, where women worked alongside men to sustain a state that endured longer than any other in European history. Theodora represents more than a single figure in a distant empire. She represents the capacity of individuals to transcend their origins, to shape institutions, and to leave legacies that outlast centuries. She reminds us that history is not the story of men alone, but of women who dared to seize power in worlds that denied them recognition. Behind the purple curtain, she emerged not as a shadow but as a sovereign partner, leaving a mark so deep that her name continues to resonate. The forgotten power players of Byzantium were never forgotten by the empire itself, and in remembering Theodora, we restore to history the voices that made its 1,000 years possible. The example of Theodora sets the stage for another towering figure of Byzantine history, Irene of Athens. If Theodora proved that a woman from humble beginnings could rise to become an indispensable partner in rule, Irene showed that a woman born into aristocratic circles could break even deeper barriers, seizing power in her own name in a society that officially allowed no place for a female emperor. Her story is one of cunning, faith, controversy, and tragedy, but also of resilience and transformation. Through Irene we see how the Byzantine Empire, while steeped in patriarchy, could still be shaken by the determination of a woman who refused to remain in the shadows of men. Irene was born in Athens, a city that still carried echoes of its classical glory but which, by her time, had long been reduced to a provincial town within the empire. Coming from the noble Sarantapichos family, she was well connected, but not so prominent as to expect a destiny of greatness. Her fortunes changed when she was chosen as a bride for Leo, the son of Emperor Constantine V. This marriage bound her to the imperial family and placed her within the palace of Constantinople, a world of intrigue, ritual, and ceaseless struggle for survival. From the moment she crossed the threshold of the great palace, she entered an arena where alliances and betrayals could determine life or death. Unlike Theodora, who had to rise by transforming her status. Irene had to protect and expand her position within an already hostile court. Her marriage produced a son, Constantine, who would later rule as Constantine VI. When Leo died and the child inherited the throne, Irene found herself in a familiar Byzantine role, that of regent mother. Many women before her had governed during the minority of their sons, but Irene approached the regency with a determination that set her apart. At first she ruled in her son's name, but quickly she consolidated power, relying on trusted eunuchs and loyal advisors to strengthen her position. Eunuchs, who could not establish dynasties of their own, were often reliable allies for empresses, and Irene used them skillfully. Yet her regency was not a passive holding pattern. She actively shaped policy, made appointments, and laid the groundwork for her most enduring legacy, the battle over icons. The iconoclastic controversy had already raged for decades when Irene assumed power. Emperors such as Leo III and Constantine V had enforced bans on the veneration of religious images, seeing them as idolatrous and politically dangerous. Entire communities were divided, monasteries suppressed, and art destroyed. Irene, however, was a devout supporter of icons, seeing them not as idols but as vital tools for devotion. As regent, she prepared to restore their use, a daring move that placed her in direct opposition to powerful factions of the military and aristocracy who supported iconoclasm. To achieve her goal, she convened a church council, first in Constantinople and then more decisively in Nicaea, where bishops and monks declared the veneration of icons legitimate. This Second Council of Nicaea in the year 787 marked a turning point in Byzantine religious life. Irene had not only resolved a theological dispute, but also asserted her authority as the guardian of orthodoxy. This move cemented her reputation as a champion of the church, but it also revealed her political boldness. In a male-dominated society, she had used a religious controversy to carve out space for her own authority. By presenting herself as the protector of true faith, she strengthened her legitimacy beyond the role of mother or regent. The veneration of icons was more than a personal belief. It was a political strategy that tied her reign to divine approval. Her enemies might question her gender, but they could not so easily challenge her role as defender of orthodoxy. As Constantine grew older, tensions between mother and son escalated. Many expected that Irene would step aside once he reached maturity, but she refused to surrender power. The court divided between supporters of the young emperor and those who remained loyal to Irene. For years, an uneasy balance persisted, with mother and son jointly exercising authority. But eventually, the conflict came to a head. Irene maneuvered against her own child, and in a shocking act, she had him seized and blinded. The brutality of this act horrified contemporaries and has troubled historians ever since. For the Byzantines, blinding was a common way to remove a rival from power without outright killing him. But for a mother to order such a punishment against her own son was unprecedented. Constantine never recovered, and Irene became the sole ruler of the Byzantine Empire. Her assumption of the title of emperor, not empress or regent, marked a radical break with tradition. She did not govern in the name of a man, but in her own right. She was hailed in official documents as Basileus, the word reserved for the emperor himself, and her portrait appeared on coins as the sole sovereign. For the first time in Byzantine history, a woman had claimed the throne outright. This boldness shocked many, but it also underscored her political genius. By refusing to hide behind the title of empress, she declared that her authority was equal to that of any man. She ruled not as a mother or a widow, but as the empire's supreme power. Irene's reign as sole ruler was marked by both achievement and challenge. Her restoration of icons gave her lasting fame, but she also faced difficulties with the army and with foreign powers. The empire at this time was under pressure from the Bulgars in the north and the Arabs to the east. Irene sought peace with the Arabs, signing treaties that stabilized the frontier, but her reliance on diplomacy sometimes drew criticism from generals who preferred war. At home, her government continued the pattern of court intrigue, with eunuchs and officials competing for influence. Irene relied heavily on her favorites, rewarding them with titles and wealth, but this also bred resentment. As her reign progressed, her position grew more precarious. One of the most remarkable episodes of her rule was her attempt to negotiate a marriage alliance with the Frankish ruler Charlemagne. By this time, Charlemagne had been crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in Rome, a move that challenged Byzantine claims to universal empire. Irene's proposal to marry him was both bold and pragmatic. Such a union would have united the eastern and western halves of Christendom, creating a single empire that stretched from the Atlantic to the Aegean. It was a vision of unity that echoed the grandeur of ancient Rome. But the plan never materialized. Opposition at court, suspicion of Charlemagne, and Irene's own declining power prevented the marriage. Still, the very fact that she considered it shows her ambition and her willingness to think beyond traditional boundaries. Her downfall came from within her own palace. By the end of her reign, her reliance on eunuchs and her alienation of powerful families weakened her support. In the year 802, her trusted minister Nikephoros turned against her, leading a palace coup. Irene was deposed, stripped of power, and sent into exile on the island of Lesbos. There she lived in relative obscurity, working at a spinning wheel to support herself, a tragic decline from the grandeur of the throne. She died not long after, her reign remembered as both glorious and scandalous. Irene's legacy, however, outlasted her fall. She had dared to do what no woman before her had done, rule as emperor in her own right. Her restoration of icons shaped the future of the Orthodox Church, ensuring that images remained central to devotion and worship. Her reign proved that the Byzantine system, despite its male-dominated structures, could be bent by the force of a determined woman. Later empresses would look back to her example, seeing in her both a model and a warning. She was praised as a saintly defender of icons by some and condemned as a power-hungry mother by others. The truth lies in both portraits. Irene was ruthless in her pursuit of authority, willing to sacrifice even her son, yet she was also visionary in her defense of faith and her assertion of female power. Her story forces us to reconsider the nature of Byzantine politics. It was not a rigid system where only men could rule, but a dynamic environment where women could, in extraordinary circumstances, seize control. The purple curtain may have concealed them from daily visibility, but it could not prevent them from shaping destiny. Irene, like Theodora before her, shows that the survival of Byzantium depended not only on emperors, but also on empresses who dared to claim power. The tragic end of Irene does not diminish her significance. On the contrary, it underscores the risks faced by any ruler in Byzantium, where betrayal and reversal were constant. That she fell victim to palace intrigue is hardly surprising, for countless emperors before and after her met similar fates. What sets her apart is not her downfall, but her unprecedented rise. She entered history as a woman who broke the greatest taboo of her age, who dared to call herself emperor and sit upon the throne of Constantine. Her courage in doing so secured her a place among the most remarkable rulers of the medieval world. When we connect her story to that of Theodora, we see a pattern of female resilience and political artistry that threads through Byzantine history. These women came from very different backgrounds, one from the circus, the other from Athenian nobility, but both found ways to navigate the perils of empire and leave indelible marks on the state. They demonstrate that power in Byzantium was never the possession of men alone. Behind the purple curtain, and at times before it, women shaped law, faith, diplomacy, and culture. Their stories remind us that the 1,000 years of Byzantine survival cannot be told without them. The life of Irene, with its mixture of triumph and tragedy, continues to inspire and to caution. She shows us that authority demands sacrifice, that the pursuit of power can lead to both glory and ruin. She reminds us that faith and politics are inseparable in the Byzantine world, where defending icons could also mean defending one's throne. And she demonstrates that even in a society that sought to confine women, a determined empress could not only challenge the system but embody it. Her reign was not an aberration, but a revelation of what was always possible within the Byzantine order. That women, too, could be emperors. In remembering Irene, we restore to history a fuller picture of Byzantium, one where the voices and deeds of women stand alongside those of men. She may have died in exile, her empire taken from her, but her name endures because she dared to rule alone. The purple curtain could not contain her ambition, nor could exile erase her legacy. She remains, like Theodora, a symbol of the hidden architects of empire, the forgotten power players whose strength sustained Byzantium through the centuries. The fall of Irene of Athens left a shadow that lingered for generations, for her daring to take the title of emperor opened a possibility that could not easily be erased from memory. Even as chroniclers tried to frame her as a cautionary tale, later empresses knew that the precedent had been set. The empire itself, no matter how much it relied on traditional gender hierarchies, had shown that in moments of crisis a woman could claim full authority. The centuries that followed did not always allow for such open declarations of female rule, but the quiet strength of women continued to guide Byzantine politics. In the 11th century, the empire once again witnessed something extraordinary: the co-rule of two sisters, Zoe and Theodora Porphyrogenita. Their joint reign was a rare experiment in shared power, marked by rivalry, ambition, and a delicate balancing act between cooperation and conflict. Together, they reminded the empire that female influence was not only enduring but adaptable, capable of surviving the most treacherous intrigues of the palace. The sisters were born into privilege as daughters of Constantine VIII, a man whose reign was brief and whose line depended on them for its continuation. The title Porphyrogenita, meaning born in the purple, was not merely ceremonial. It signified that they had been born to a reigning emperor within the special purple chamber of the palace, an honor that carried immense weight in legitimizing dynastic claims. In Byzantium, legitimacy mattered as much as military power, and the sisters embodied continuity. Their very existence secured the dynasty in times of uncertainty, for no usurper could easily dismiss women born within the sacred walls of empire. Zoe, the elder, was groomed from the start as the more visible of the two. Her beauty, charisma, and force of personality made her a natural candidate for marriage alliances that could stabilize the throne. Theodora, though equally intelligent and strong-willed, was often overshadowed by her sister and even sent into a convent for a time, a move that reflected both the politics of succession and Zoe's dominance at court. Yet the bond of blood between them could not be entirely broken, and their fates remained intertwined, even when rivalry seemed stronger than unity. When Constantine VIII died, Zoe ascended as empress and soon married Romanos III, a match that secured her rule but also revealed the challenges of navigating male ambition. Romanos proved to be an ineffective ruler, obsessed with military glory that repeatedly slipped through his grasp. Zoe, meanwhile, found herself sidelined in governance. But as the years passed, her restlessness grew, and rumors swirled of her involvement in her husband's sudden death. Whether or not Zoe played a direct role, what mattered to contemporaries was that she emerged from the episode unscathed, her power undiminished, and her path open to new political maneuvers. She quickly married Michael IV, a man whose rise reflected both her preference and the influence of powerful court figures, especially his brother, John the Orphanatrophos. This second marriage gave Zoe renewed visibility, but it also constrained her. Michael's fragile health and John's domineering control limited Zoe's independence. The empress who had been expected to dominate the throne now found herself manipulated by those around her. Yet Zoe was never entirely powerless. She cultivated loyalty among courtiers, used her personal wealth to reward allies, and kept her legitimacy as a purple-born princess at the forefront of her image. Even when political winds shifted, her birthright remained her strongest weapon. Theodora, meanwhile, lingered in relative obscurity, her intelligence and competence known to those who watched closely, but her opportunities limited by the dominance of her sister and the decisions of emperors who feared her potential. At one point, a plot to marry her to a general threatened to upset court politics, and Zoe herself was rumored to have opposed the plan, preferring to keep her sister in the margins. But the tides of fortune in Byzantium never remained steady for long. When Michael IV died and his successor, Michael V, attempted to sideline Zoe entirely, the people of Constantinople erupted in fury. The city's devotion to Zoe was profound, tied not only to her person but to her dynastic legitimacy. Crowds filled the streets, demanding her restoration, and the uprising became one of the most dramatic moments of popular intervention in Byzantine history. Michael V was deposed, blinded, and exiled, and Zoe was reinstated as empress. In this moment of upheaval, Theodora stepped from the shadows into the light. Recognizing that Zoe's position, though powerful, needed reinforcement, the court and populace turned to her younger sister as a co-ruler. The two women, long estranged, were suddenly bound together on the throne, sharing authority in a way unprecedented for the empire. For the first time in its long history, two women sat side by side as sovereigns, issuing decrees, appearing in ceremonies, and embodying the continuity of imperial rule. Their portraits were minted together on coins, their images presented as equals. The symbolism was profound. Byzantium was not merely tolerating female power, it was enshrining it in the most public and enduring form possible. The co-rule of Zoe and Theodora was not without tension. Their personalities differed sharply. Zoe was impulsive, passionate, and prone to sudden decisions, while Theodora was calculated, reserved, and determined to impose order. Where Zoe sought personal alliances and emotional satisfaction, Theodora focused on administration and justice. Their rivalry, rooted in years of unequal treatment, did not vanish when they shared the throne. Yet necessity forced cooperation. They divided responsibilities, navigated court factions, and presented a united front when threats loomed. Together, they managed to stabilize the empire during a period when internal chaos could easily have shattered it. The art of female diplomacy was central to their reign. Zoe, with her history of marriages, understood the importance of alliances forged through personal ties. Her 3 husbands had all played roles in shaping Byzantine politics, for better or worse, and her willingness to remarry reflected not weakness but pragmatism. Theodora, by contrast, remained unmarried and used her singleness as a source of independence. She was not bound by the ambitions of a husband and could act with a freedom rare for women in her position. Between them, the sisters embodied 2 strategies of power, one through marital diplomacy, the other through autonomous authority. Their rule was tested repeatedly by betrayal and ambition. Courtiers who hoped to manipulate Zoe found themselves checked by Theodora's vigilance. Generals who dreamed of seizing the throne were outmaneuvered by the sisters' combined legitimacy. The empire, still one of the wealthiest and most formidable states in the medieval world, required careful management, and the sisters provided it. Though their reign was not marked by dramatic military victories or sweeping reforms, it was significant in its demonstration of stability during shared female leadership. In a world that often portrayed women as sources of weakness or division, Zoe and Theodora proved capable of preserving order even in the face of constant intrigue. Yet harmony between them could never last forever. After a time, Zoe once again married, this time to Constantine IX, bringing yet another man into the equation. This move shifted the balance of power, giving Constantine an official role while leaving Theodora somewhat sidelined. The partnership between sisters, though never fully dissolved, lost some of its force. Still, Theodora remained a formidable presence, waiting for the moment when fortune would again place her at the center. That moment came after Zoe's death, when Theodora assumed the throne in her own right, ruling alone with competence and resolve. Her reign, though relatively brief, demonstrated once more that women could govern effectively without male partners. The legacy of Zoe and Theodora's joint rule lies not only in their survival of intrigue, but in the way they expanded the boundaries of possibility. Their portraits on coins, their decrees issued in tandem, and their very presence in ceremonies altered the imagery of empire. They showed that women could not only inherit legitimacy, but actively wield it. They showed that rivalry could be turned into shared authority when circumstances demanded. And they showed that the empire's resilience was tied to its ability to adapt, even if that adaptation meant placing 2 sisters on the throne. Their lives also highlight the role of personal ambition and emotion in Byzantine politics. Zoe's marriages, Theodora's calculated independence, their moments of conflict and reconciliation. All these remind us that the empire was not an abstract machine but a human institution shaped by desires, fears, and relationships. In the labyrinth of the great palace, where whispers could spark revolts and gestures could determine allegiance, these sisters navigated the treacherous waters of power with remarkable skill. When we place their story alongside that of Irene and Theodora, we see a continuum of female influence across centuries. Each woman faced different challenges, but all demonstrated that Byzantine politics could never be reduced to male authority alone. The purple curtain concealed not only domestic life but strategies, alliances, and decisions that determined the fate of the state. Theodora of Justinian, Irene of Athens, Zoe, and Theodora Porphyrogenita were not anomalies, but part of a larger pattern of female resilience and leadership. The reign of the sisters also serves as a reminder of how fragile power could be, even for those born in the purple. Intrigues at court, shifts in popular opinion, the ambitions of generals, all these could undo years of careful maneuvering. Yet the sisters endured, leaving behind a legacy of female sovereignty that could not be ignored. Their rule stands as one of the most vivid examples of women shaping the course of Byzantine history, not from behind the scenes, but from the very throne itself. Zoe and Theodora Porphyrogenita embody both rivalry and unity, fragility and strength. Their lives tell us that the empire's survival depended not only on soldiers and administrators, but also on women who dared to share the purple, who turned sisterhood into sovereignty and personal ambition into political stability. They remind us that Byzantine history, so often told as a tale of emperors and generals, is incomplete without the voices and deeds of its empresses. Behind the purple curtain and sometimes before it, they stood as rulers in their own right, their stories woven into the 1,000 years of empire that still fascinate us today. The reigns of Zoe and Theodora Porphyrogenita closed one of the most fascinating chapters of Byzantine female sovereignty, yet their stories were never isolated. They were part of a chain that stretched back to Theodora beside Justinian, to Irene of Athens who claimed the throne in her own name, and even further to countless women whose influence, though less documented, sustained the empire in moments of uncertainty. Together, these empresses wove unseen threads through the history of Byzantium, threads that tied dynasties together, that held the empire steady when its foundations trembled, and that challenged assumptions about the limits of female power. To understand their legacy is to reassess the nature of Byzantine leadership itself, and to acknowledge that the empire survived not merely because of emperors and generals, but also because of women who refused to be silent. For much of modern history, the narrative of Byzantium was shaped by voices that downplayed or distorted the role of women. Monastic chroniclers, steeped in patriarchal values, often portrayed empresses as dangerous temptresses, schemers, or at best passive consorts. When they praised a woman, it was usually for her piety rather than her political skill. When they condemned her, it was for ambition, as if ambition were a sin reserved for women alone. Yet the surviving evidence, when carefully examined, tells another story. These women were not aberrations but necessary actors in the Byzantine system. The empire, with its constant succession crises, its dependence on legitimacy rooted in bloodlines, and its intertwining of sacred and secular authority, created openings that women could and did exploit. Far from being anomalies, the empresses were woven into the very fabric of governance. Theodora's defiance during the Nika riots, Irene's restoration of icons, Zoe's survival through multiple marriages and betrayals, Theodora Porphyrogenita's calm administration after years in the shadows. All these episodes show women not merely reacting to circumstances but shaping them. They made decisions that altered laws, redirected foreign policy, stabilized dynasties, and safeguarded faith. Their actions were not only personal triumphs, but turning points for the empire itself. The myth that they were decorative figures collapses under the weight of this evidence. Instead, they emerge as political architects whose designs allowed Byzantium to endure for more than a millennium. Their collective legacy lies partly in their ability to redefine what leadership looked like in their society. In an age when kings and emperors were expected to embody martial strength, these women demonstrated that authority could rest on other foundations. On legitimacy of birth, on wisdom in counsel, on steadfast defense of faith, on the ability to rally popular support. They proved that power did not require wielding a sword personally on the battlefield. It required vision, resilience, and the courage to act decisively when others hesitated. This redefinition did not erase gender boundaries in Byzantium, but it bent them enough to allow women to stand at the center of empire. Their influence extended beyond politics into culture and religion. Theodora's legal reforms protecting vulnerable women left an imprint on Byzantine law. Irene's defense of icons ensured that Byzantine art would remain rich in sacred imagery, a tradition that shaped Orthodox Christianity to this day. Zoe and Theodora Porphyrogenita's reigns demonstrated that the legitimacy of purple-born blood could sustain stability even without male heirs, reinforcing the sacred aura of dynastic continuity. These contributions were not minor footnotes. They redirected the currents of history. Every church decorated with mosaics of saints, every monastery preserved by imperial patronage, every law that gave protection to the powerless bore the unseen mark of these women. It is easy to imagine that their impact ended with their deaths, but in truth their legacies echoed through later centuries. The model of female regency, perfected by Irene, became standard whenever a child emperor inherited the throne. The precedent of female co-rule, established by Zoe and Theodora Porphyrogenita, provided later empresses with a model of partnership rather than subordination. Even the suspicion and hostility that chroniclers directed at them became a kind of backhanded acknowledgement of their power. One does not fear or slander what is insignificant. The very intensity of the criticism directed at empresses shows how much they mattered. In the long view, their contributions also shaped the way the Byzantine Empire was remembered by others. Western Europeans, often critical of Byzantium, nevertheless recognized the unusual prominence of women in its politics. Arab and Persian observers, too, commented on the visibility of empresses. Byzantium stood apart from many of its contemporaries in allowing women to hold such visible roles, even if only in extraordinary circumstances. This distinctiveness became part of the empire's identity, a reminder that its complex blend of Roman heritage, Greek culture, and Christian faith produced political forms not found elsewhere. The legacy of these women also challenges modern readers to rethink what constitutes power. Too often, history measures power in battles won, territories conquered, or armies commanded. By these standards, Byzantine empresses might seem secondary. But when power is measured in terms of survival, stability, and the preservation of identity, their achievements become clear. Theodora's decision to stay during the Nika riots preserved Justinian's reign. Irene's restoration of icons preserved the spiritual unity of the empire. Zoe and Theodora's joint rule preserved continuity at a time when dynastic collapse threatened chaos. These were victories as vital as any battlefield conquest, victories of endurance rather than aggression. One can trace their influence even into the empire's final centuries. Later empresses of the Comnenian and Palaeologan dynasties drew upon the precedents set by their predecessors. Anna Damascene, mother of Alexios Komnenos, governed as regent with authority that echoed Irene's. The Palaeologan empresses, though often overshadowed by their husbands in the struggle against the rising Ottoman power, nevertheless continued the tradition of patronage and mediation established centuries before. The unseen threads of Theodora, Irene, Zoe, and Theodora Porphyrogenita continued to weave themselves into the tapestry of empire until its very end. Their collective legacy also speaks to a broader truth about history, that the stories we tell are often incomplete. For centuries, the history of Byzantium was written as the story of emperors, generals, and patriarchs. Only in recent times have scholars begun to restore the voices of women to the narrative, recognizing their indispensable role. This reevaluation does not diminish the achievements of men, but enriches our understanding of how the empire truly functioned. It shows us that power was never as simple as official titles suggested. It was negotiated, shared, contested, and often wielded by those whom official records sought to minimize. To study these empresses is to uncover the hidden architecture of authority, the unseen foundations without which the empire could not have stood. The challenge for us today is to continue seeking out these untold stories, to look beyond the official chronicles and uncover the lives that shaped history from behind the curtain. Every empire, every kingdom, every society has women whose contributions have been overlooked or dismissed. Byzantium gives us striking examples, but it is not unique. Across the world, from China to Africa to the Americas, women have acted as rulers, advisors, diplomats, and patrons, even when their names were forgotten. To recover these stories is not merely an academic exercise. It is a way of restoring balance to our understanding of the past, of recognizing that human history has always been a shared endeavor. The enduring influence of the Byzantine empresses also invites us to consider how cultural memory is shaped. Theodora's speech during the Nika riots has been retold countless times as a symbol of courage. Irene's council at Nicaea is still honored in the Orthodox Church as a turning point of faith. Zoe and Theodora's joint reign continues to fascinate as a rare experiment in female co-rule. These stories survive not only because they are dramatic, but because they speak to universal themes. Resilience in crisis, the struggle for legitimacy, the tension between ambition and duty. They remind us that leadership is not confined to one gender, that courage and wisdom are human qualities, not male prerogatives. Their legacy also challenges us to question how we define greatness. Too often, greatness is equated with conquest or domination. Yet the Byzantine empresses show another path, greatness as preservation, as reform, as the courage to act when others falter. They remind us that holding a society together through upheaval can be as heroic as expanding its borders. They remind us that law, faith, and culture are as vital to an empire's survival as armies and fortifications. Their greatness lay not in wielding swords, but in wielding vision. As we reflect on their lives, we are called not only to admire but also to learn. Their stories urge us to look for power in unexpected places, to recognize the influence of those whom history has overlooked, and to honor the resilience of women who refused to remain silent. They urge us to continue exploring the hidden half of history, the voices that lie beyond the official chronicles. And they invite us to carry these lessons forward, to see in our own time the importance of including all perspectives in our understanding of leadership and legacy. The unseen threads woven by Theodora, Irene, Zoe, and Theodora Porphyrogenita continue to shine centuries after Byzantium fell. Their courage in crisis, their skill in governance, and their resilience in the face of hostility remind us that history is never the story of one group alone. It is the shared story of humanity, in which women have always played indispensable roles. To uncover their stories is to recover a more truthful, more complete past. And to honor their legacy is to recognize the strength that lies beyond the purple curtain, in the lives of those who dared to shape history even when the world tried to silence them. Their example stands as a call to us all, to keep searching, to keep telling, and to keep remembering the untold stories of powerful women across time. For every Theodora, Irene, Zoe, and Theodora Porphyrogenita whose name survives, there are countless others waiting to be rediscovered. Their unseen threads are there, woven through the fabric of history, ready to be revealed if only we care to look.